Thank you for downloading Season 6, Episode 7 of Baseball Pitching the Fix. I am your host, Joe Janish, and with me, as always, is baseball pitching motion expert Angel Borrelli. And here we are in Episode 7. We are recording this right around the end of June, just to give you an idea of the time frame in case you're listening at a really future date. We have a few interesting topics today. They're both coming from the Major League Baseball world. We are going to be talking about Jordan Hicks, the flamethrowing reliever for the Cardinals, who just had successful Tommy John surgery. And we will also be talking about the Texas Rangers' latest big idea on preventing pitching injuries and how that went for them. And as always, we will have our final segment called The Pearl, which will be kind of a mystery because Angel likes to keep me in the dark on that. Before we go any further, let's find out how Angel's doing over there on the left coast.
I am fine. Thank you. How are you doing?
Fantastic as always. So, Angel, we just heard the great news that Jordan Hicks has had successful Tommy John surgery. Isn't that wonderful?
Yes. Well, I'm very happy he went that route because I know that in the first article they talked about he might be able to rehab his way through it. And I started shaking my head, and Jordan was smart enough to know that he needed to get the surgery and not try any alternatives. And that is the way that you should go when you can.
Yep. And, you know, the thing with Jordan Hicks is that he is such an electrifying pitcher. He just pretty much came out of nowhere and just throwing 103, 105 miles an hour. I think he was the fastest average velocity of anyone in major leagues. I mean, maybe even Major League history. I think he was even faster than Aroldis Chapman was throwing in his prime. And, you know, they didn't call them the Jordan rules, but they called them the Jordan preferences. The Cardinals were trying to keep him safe by limiting some of his exposure, trying to limit his innings, his pitching, and it just was all for naught. He still wound up blowing out his elbow, unfortunately, which was really, a shame because it was so fun to watch him. But, it's just another example of how no matter what a team tried to do to prevent an injury using the limiting of his workload, it didn't help. And we keep going through this. And this was one of those things where I really wanted to talk to you about this because he's a younger guy. It didn't seem like he had thrown a whole lot of innings, but is it safe to assume that he may have blown out his arm because he was throwing too fast? Because now that's the next thing that's going to come up is that, guys who throw really hard, guys who throw over 100 miles an hour, they're going to blow out their UCL because that's just what happens when you throw that hard. Or is it something else? So from your perspective, Angel, what could you say about what happened here with poor Jordan?
Well, first of all, I have been obsessed with Jordan Hicks. Back in 2018, my pitchers were talking about him and they asked me to look him up and, they think he's a fantastic pitcher. So I went and did some research on him and was just so impressed with his performances. And I actually was able to get some film of him in a game. It was actually a bullpen prior to a game. And so I was able to see, or actually during the game when he was warming up. And so I was actually able to film him. So he's a fantastic pitcher. But I think this question that we ask, when a pitcher throws hard, what's the problem? We already know, and this is just basic science, that what the elbow is capable of, what the ligament is capable of when they get it into a lab and they measure the strength, et cetera. We already know that the ligament is being asked to do a little bit more than it's capable of doing. However, we also know that when you have a situation like that, and that's just the name of the game, and that's true for the guy who's throwing 90 miles an hour. I mean, that's true. That's just true for pitching. We know that we have to use other methods to make sure that elbow and that the shoulder, et cetera, the parts of the body that are being put through something that's a little more than what they're designed to handle, that you bring in some supplementary ways of strengthening and making that that part of the body stronger. And of course, we do that through making sure the muscles are strong that support the elbow, that we make sure that the pitcher's doing what he does correctly. So the question of, do I think it's his velocity? Here's what I think. And we discussed this last week when Coach Larry Owens was on, and we were talking about velocity. Velocity isn't going anywhere. To start even looking at it as the problem, what are you going to do? Say, okay, guys, we don't want you throwing over 98? No. The fact that we're seeing so many guys throw harder is a product of the fact that pitching is just evolving. It's just like our phones. They're getting faster. They do more things. It's just the way it is. And as a sports scientist, I don't like to spend time having conjecture about things that, hey, this is just part of the game. I'd rather spend time thinking of the solutions. So to me, looking at it like, okay, he's throwing that hard and therefore this is to be expected, that is not something I would ever say. But what I think is we've got a great gifted pitcher here who is throwing, and his whip is under 1. I mean, that's amazing for throwing that hard. So this guy knows how to get the job done. But I think what we have to do is understand that that is the direction we're going in. There's more speed involved. There's more velocity involved in the motion, especially with some of these guys. But you cannot avoid looking at how he is doing what he does. And in 2018, when I looked at his mechanics, I said, and I told my guys this, I said, he's great, but what I'm worried about is he's throwing that hard with not all parts of his body actually helping him throw that hard. Meaning this is a guy who's got a gift. He could be even better. He could throw actually harder. So what I saw in the 2018 film, which I have in a bullpen during a game on that in May of 2018, I think it was May 23rd or 26th, I filmed him off the television. His arm was not in the right position at the time his front foot landed, and he had premature rotation of the hip, meaning that we learned through, some of the shows that I talk about, that the way a pitcher derives velocity is 3 layers of rotation that occur that pass on. And remember, Joe, the quarterback wide receiver analogy?
Yep.
The 3 layers of rotation pass on the power to the shoulder, which passes it through the elbow and wrist out through the hand onto the ball. If a pitcher is not able to utilize the first level of rotation, that is the pelvis, during the accumulation phase of velocity, he is not going to get all the help he can get from his body. That's number 1. Number 2, when you have that situation that the hip is already rotated almost fully when the foot lands, sometimes, not always, but it's definitely true in his case, his arm doesn't have enough time to get into the proper position before he accelerates so he can use his big muscles to accelerate. So let's look at it this way. Think of this as music. There's a 1, 2, 3 count for the pelvis, lower trunk, upper trunk to rotate. That's 1, 2, 3 counts. The shoulder needs 1, 2, 3 counts going the opposite direction to get into its full pre-stretch, meaning you're stretching the heck out of the accelerators, pre-stretching them so they can explode. If you've got the trunk going 2, 3 and the arm going 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, the pitcher's ready to throw, the arm is at 2. Does that make sense, Joe?
Yes.
I'm saying this completely differently than I've ever said it. So this is kind of a timing thing. So when I say late arm, I don't want any coach who's hearing it go, not the arm. He'll never throw 105 again if we touch the arm. This isn't an arm thing. This is a timing thing, probably due to the way he might come out of the glove, the way he does it. Nothing that is going to affect. Trust me, his arm knows it needs another second. So you don't get into trouble when you recognize that the issue I'm talking about isn't you don't change something with the arm. You have to change the synchronization of the upper and lower body. So that's what he has. So his hip is pretty rotated. His arm, when it's supposed to be at that famous angle that we talk about, and it's on, you can go on YouTube and see it, the stride foot contact arm angle, which is in line with, of course, those considerations come from the ASMI and all the biomechanical evaluations that they do. And so these are the recommended angles, and they work with the way the body works. His arm is pointing downward to the ground. And he does have a slight way that he comes into his arm position with the elbows raising. So he's got some things that are not correct with the arm, but he's throwing so well and he's so accurate that what I look at is this is a gifted guy. And when you're going that fast, things are going to happen. And he's got a very fast lower body. He's got quick power, and that's where he's getting his power from. But sometimes the details of the mechanism of power can be lost. And it doesn't mean he looks bad or whatever, but it means that he's got something that's making his arm work harder. When the shoulder can't get the pre-stretch in through the pec when it needs to, you have to do a different action at the shoulder, and it sends more forces than are already there through the elbow. And that's what is happening when we have a pitcher do this. So this is something that when I saw that, I said, oh no, when I saw this a year ago. And so when I read this article, I was really saddened by it, because if I had a gold star player like that on my team, and every pitcher is always wanting to get better, if he's someone I want to protect, and they did want to protect him by cutting down his workload, I would think that when you say we want to protect him, that the first thing on the list should not be, let's make him throw less. Let's not put him in as much. Let's limit this. It would be, let's make sure there's no risk factors present. Just the way they check out people, you have to have a physical before you enter this thing, or you have to have a physical before you get on the team. And the astronauts have to pass a certain physical before they send them up to the moon, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Let's make sure this flamethrower is not exhibiting any risk factors for things that are, one, vulnerable for a regular pitcher, but extremely vulnerable to a flamethrower. So that to me is where the major leagues are starting to sound. I've said this before, I love that they're caring enough to start thinking about the ideas of taking care of their pitchers. But I don't like that they're manipulating variables that are the one thing that makes the pitcher, that actually is who the pitcher is. He's a closer. He needs to pitch. But he also needs to have the right recovery, and he needs to have the right mechanics. The best recovery in the world isn't going to recover you if you're using your body incorrectly. Now, here's the golden nugget about his situation, Joe. I love this. He is very specific. He had what we call an acute injury, at least from what I can tell from what I'm reading. An acute injury means he's fine, boom, he's not fine. He wasn't complaining of tightness or anything that we usually get with pitchers who have Tommy John. They've been pitching through pain for months. They had forearm tightness. He said he felt something in the ninth inning, and then he threw 4 more pitches, and he could feel something was wrong. And he knew it was so wrong that when they first told him when he came off the field, oh, it's probably just a spasm or a tricep, he said he knew it was more than that. So here's what we have. The 5th to the last pitch is where he tore his UCL, or injured it to the point where he tore it during the next 4 pitches. He needs to have those mechanics looked at right now. And during rehab, he can start working on the physical, not the throwing. But once he's past that initial rehab, when they start him on a throwing program, or where he's able to just move his body, he doesn't even need to use weights. He can be working on his mechanics without releasing a ball, without lifting a dumbbell, without doing anything. He can start with the education and the knowledge of what it's supposed to feel like to synchronize his upper and lower body. So that's my message to Jordan Hicks, who is a gifted and wonderful, one of the best pitchers. And they are concerned that after rehab, he's not going to be able to throw 105 miles an hour. The rehab is not going to be the reason if he doesn't return to that. Once you have an injury like that, you have to start to do things correctly. And given that he throws so hard, his body isn't going to just let him throw that hard. If he does it right, his real self will emerge again. But if he doesn't do it right, his inside self will control the way and how hard he throws. So it's going to be a matter of how they handle this. And it's a gift. Whenever you know when an injury happened, it's a gift, because the way through these things is to go back to the scene of the crime. And I'm pretty certain that what I saw last year, I would probably still see this year if I was looking at that film. So there's some good with the bad here.
Right. So, Angel, if you, for whatever reason, had been on the Ranger staff and they had a concern, they had, oh, we have this pitcher who's throwing 104, 105 miles an hour, and you were their consultant, and they said to you, so what is the best course of action on how we can preserve this pitcher and make sure he's continuing to throw 105 miles an hour for the next 5 years? What would you have done to keep him on the field?
I would have done two things immediately. One, I would have said, call up Jordan right now. I want to meet with him. I would have said, Jordan, take your shirt off. Let me take a look at you. And I would look at the structural, just alignment and structural stuff. Guys, the way you look at a car that's used before you buy it. That's the way I would look at him. I'd have him do a series of movements so I could just look at his bones moving. Just like, guys, the way you're going to kick the tires, lean to the side to see if it's been in an accident and been repainted, and then you're going to ask for the keys. Okay, so we're going to do that. Then I'm going to sit him down and I'm going to ask him where he gets sore, how often he gets sore, what's his practice for training. I would do an in-depth interview with him. And then from that, I would create the plan, correct the things that he's doing that could hurt him. First of all, you remove things that don't, like if he said, oh, I he's not going to say this, but let's say he says, oh, I throw a bullpen in the morning and then I throw one in the evening. Okay, we're going to eliminate that. You start pulling things away that could be deleterious, and then you start adding things in. And that would be the beginning. I couldn't tell you where I'd go after that because the information comes organically from the pitcher. But I can tell you one thing. You have to be careful when you start to look at what the pitcher does as a pitcher and start intervening on that, because that's his heart and soul and that's his skill. In other words, if a pitcher says to me, like I have pitchers that through off season, when we're starting to throw again, I ask them this very specific question when I'm setting up their pitching program. I say, do you historically like to play catch the day before you pitch, or do you like to have the day off before a day when you pitch? What is your preference? Every pitcher has a different answer. I mean, it's one of the two, but they're not all the same. I have pitchers that say, oh, no, I have to play catch the day before, but I don't like to play catch the day after. So I ask them about the day before, the day after. Do you like to have the day after pitching off? Yes, I don't like to play catch that day, but I like to play catch the second day. So they have a combination of things, and they're very specific. I never have a pitcher go, and when I do, I say that is something we have to investigate. And then our first step is to figure that out. If a pitcher doesn't know who he is or what he needs, you've got to be careful when you start pulling pitchers after 70 pitches, starters. You've got to be careful when you start limiting things. You've got to ask yourself, why am I doing this thing? And is there another way to accomplish? In other words, they're trying to fix something with a hammer that needs a screwdriver. That's what it looks like to me. That's why I'm concerned about the major leagues right now, because I was starting to get excited that they're caring, but they're leaning into things that are these external numbers thing. I mean, baseball's filled with numbers. They keep thinking numbers are the solution to everything. These are pitchers. Be concerned about the pitcher more than you are about the pitches. And then we will start to, I think, make some progress with finding out the formula. And guess what, Joe? It's not going to be the same for any two pitchers. And that's why we cannot have these all pitchers do this, and every Tuesday we do this, and every Thursday they do this. No, it's really dependent on that pitcher himself and understanding how he gets sore, how long it takes him to recover. All of this is as important to me as it is to some guy who's controlling and looking at spin rates. The way that data is important to that guy, knowing the pitcher and the things about him, it tells a story, and it's from that story that you come up with the formula. So I want St. Louis, who seems to be very concerned right now about him and who actually showed some concern prior to this, to actually take the golden nugget that's within this, take a look at his mechanics, start to look at some stuff, and then talk to him about what he needs. And also, I think, investigate this injury more to make sure it was an acute injury and that he hadn't had, some problems that were ensuing.
Well, it's too bad that you weren't able to consult on keeping him healthy. But although it sounds like if he does take the steps of trying to figure out how to fix his timing issue, is it possible that he could throw even faster than 105, 106 because his timing is all in sync? And would that give him even more velocity?
Velocity is a choice that a pitcher makes. Velocity is a choice. Now, how do I know this? Because I interviewed Dr. Steve Evans, who was my advisor at San Francisco State when I was getting my master's degree, and he happened to be an ex-pitcher, and he was the exercise physiology professor, and he pitched for the Yankees in the farm system and became injured. We had an in-depth interview one day, and I was asking him about different things, and he said to me, and he was talking intricately about what goes on in a pitcher's head when he's on the mound, and he said velocity is a choice. The pitcher makes that choice as he faces every hitter. What's he going to do? How hard does he want to throw? Just like he's deciding which pitch. And when he said velocity is a choice, I thought that was amazing. And here's what I know about speed. How fast you go when you're doing an agility drill or running is a matter of how much guts you have to go that fast. Speed is something that you have to be gutsy enough to handle. You have to be, if you're on skates, gutsy enough to go fast. So it's going to depend on, one, how his arm actually feels. Because elbows, pitchers throw through shoulder pain. They don't throw through elbow pain. It's how it feels when he begins to throw again. Number two, it's a matter of his guts, and that proportion of courage correlates to how good his arm feels. But three, he has to get some information that's going to help build that courage and confidence. I'll bet you anything that if I showed Jordan, even the film I have, and said, Jordan, see this right here where your hip is? See that there? See your arm? See how it's not quite fully externally rotated? You see how you had to get another beat going here to catch up with your lower body? He would be shaking his head saying, you know what? I feel that sometimes. I know he would, because it's on film. And I know these guys, they can feel it. I've never had a pitcher look at something and say, I don't even relate to that. The minute they see it, they go, oh, yeah, because it's on film. I'm not making it up. And then I show them, and then I put their body in the right position, and that gets them excited. That excitement gives courage. So in answer to your question, Joe, he can do whatever it is that he wants, but he's going to have to do everything right to give him the guts to be able to be the pitcher he actually is. And I hope that he has a chance to do that.
Yeah, me too. I mean, it's again just an electric player and somebody exciting to watch. And we really hope that he can get back into the game and do it all again. It would be really great.
Well, let me say one thing about him that I loved in the article. The article implied that, they thought it wasn't serious. They opted for an MRI, of course, just to confirm. He saw the tear, and that when they explained all the methods to him, because they were thinking they could rehab it without surgery, he said no. He said, no, I want to get the surgery. I love that because that means he's listening to the beat of his own drummer. He knows his own body. He also felt that moment when it felt so weird, and he never wants to feel that way again. That shows me that this is a guy that's made us some tough stuff, some good stuff, and I think that we're going to see something amazing from him as long as he does everything right and doesn't just go out there, driving 190 miles without having replaced his brakes. Do you see what I'm saying? So, yeah, it will be interesting to track this.
All right. Well, we will definitely be watching that story as it evolves. So, and there was another story in MLB that recently that kind of caught my eye, and I know it caught your eye as well. And it kind of sort of is connected to this whole Jordan Hicks thing. Again, as I mentioned when I introduced the story about Hicks, the Cardinals were trying to find ways to, keep his arm preserved, limiting his innings or, his exposure, however you want to call it. And this article popped up about the Texas Rangers and how they implemented a new kind of program to keep their young pitchers safe in their minds. They were looking to prevent more injuries, and it involved a shutdown period where as soon as they would draft these pitchers who maybe had kind of big workloads in their high school or even college careers, and maybe even that season in their final amateur season. And the first thing that they did was they just shut them down for 4 to 6 weeks and didn't have them pick up a ball whatsoever. And it was another one of these programs where they just were limiting, and not allowing them to throw. And there were some other points in the article, but the reason that stuck out to me so much was because 10 years ago, here we are in 2019. I remember 10 years ago in 2009 when former Rangers pitcher Nolan Ryan became the executive assistant to the owner or something like that. And he suddenly had a lot of influence over what happened with the Rangers. And the Rangers, going back to the days of Tom House being their pitching coach, have always had trouble keeping their young pitchers healthy. And so they've gone through all these different methods and training theories and all kinds of things to try to keep these pitchers healthy. And they just keep having a lot of trouble doing that, no matter what all these out of the box things that they keep trying. And I remember 10 years ago, Nolan Ryan was saying, if you ask Nolan Ryan why so many pitchers are blowing out their elbows, he would state right back, because they're not throwing enough. That's it. That was all that was in his mind. There was no other reason. They were not throwing enough, so they were not conditioning their arms. So he had a lot of influence on the Rangers program. So all of a sudden, all of the Rangers pitchers were on programs where they were throwing more, probably more than they'd ever thrown before, because there was this idea and theory that the more you throw, the more you strengthen your arm, and the more that you strengthen your arm, the more you will prevent injury. That was where the philosophy was for a long time too. And it didn't really do anything to help prevent Tommy John surgeries. I don't even want to get into all the names of the pitchers who were hurt. And now they're going the other route. They went from all kinds of throwing for their young pitchers to shutting them down. And it's like, it's just so interesting to me to watch this whole circle of, going around and around and around. And the Rangers and I don't want to pick on the Rangers. I'm just pointing them out as an example because they're kind of a microcosm of everything that's been going on in MLB with all these teams and all these people trying to figure out how to prevent injuries. They're going both ways. Don't let them throw, make them throw more. And it's just another example of not being able to keep pitchers safe. And you saw the article as well, and I know that you have your own perspective on it. And I think that your perspective will actually lead us into our teaching moment. So why don't you start to talk about what you thought about that article, which we will have a link to in the show notes.
Yes, and I think the take-home message from the teaching moment this week will be titled, "Don't Throw the Baby Out with the Bathwater," meaning the Rangers are scratching their head about this situation because what the article said, for those of you who didn't read it, is that they went ahead and did this program to preserve the arms of their new draftees that had just come out of a high school and a college season. And instead of having them show up in Arizona and start throwing, they shut them down, not just for the purpose they describe of controlling their throwing, but to introduce them to what it's like to be a baseball player, but mostly to fill in the gap with education during the time when they felt if they could shut them down from a load that they had during college and high school, that when they re-entered, their chances of injury would be less. Now, I don't know if so the first question is, what did they have a lot of injuries with their rookies? And that's what led them to this? Probably, because usually you don't try to create something unless there's a need for it. And so what I like about what the Rangers did is they thought about the transition time for a pitcher, and they decided that this is what they were going to do. But again, you're right, Joe. They are doing, and we mentioned this in the prior segment, they were looking to these external factors like, well, let's just not let him throw. Let's take time off. Let's, fill the space in with education, et cetera. So they were introducing other things. But the point is that they were looking to shutting down something which I'm not sure that all the pitchers even needed. So here's what concerns me. This is what sent up the first flag. There's no way that every pitcher you drafted is the same. So if you have a policy that's kind of radical like this to help the pitcher, it couldn't be right for everyone. One pitcher may need to shut down for 3 weeks to recover his arm. Another pitcher may need to not shut down at all. Maybe he didn't get enough innings. Who knows? But the first thing is you don't come up with a cookie cutter plan unless there's a real good reason for it. Secondly, what they implied was that they expected these guys to return to play and not have any injuries. And this huge percentage, Joe, I don't know if you remember from the article, I don't, but to the audience, it's a huge percentage of these guys ended up, a whole bunch of them had Tommy John surgery. This is what their frustration was. They're going, what did we do wrong? They thought the deloading program, which is what they call it, would prevent injuries. And in fact, the number of surgeries on their rookies had increased.
Yeah, it turned out that 54% of the participants in the program, it was 6 out of 11, wound up having Tommy John surgery.
Which is insane, right? So first of all, they looked at a period on a calendar when they were going to give these guys time off, and then they knew when they would have to start throwing again. And somehow they didn't match up what they needed from them at a certain time, which probably would be rookie ball in September or something. They didn't match that up properly with what they were going to be doing during the summer. So when you're thinking about shutting down, and coaches, we talk about this all the time, or parents, if you're saying, can I shut my kid down in June all the way through September? Well, if he's got a showcase in September or a tryout, he can't be shut down. The only way you can shut him down in the summer is if he doesn't have to do anything till November and December. In other words, shutdowns have to be created with the end in mind. And you can't move the dates of rookie ball. Arizona show up time is September, whatever. You have to plan for that. So that's number one. But so what I like is they're trying to do something. What I don't like is that they're doing the external stuff. Each pitcher, each rookie should be evaluated for the risk factors for injury. Combine that with their profile, combine that with what they tell you about how much they hurt or recover or where they hurt after they pitch. That's how you come up with the formula. So what I think that they forgot was that while they were trying to do this deloading situation, they weren't taking into account who needed what And also, how do you reload them? And the truth is just a generic thing. Pitchers need to pitch, but they also need to be strong to pitch. So when you're talking about how much someone's going to throw, once you are in the cycle of throwing that a pitcher is in, and when I say throwing, I mean he's flat ground. Pitching is pitching, two different things: throwing, pitching. If he is in a throwing cycle, he should throw and always get recovery for how much he throws on a given day. If he's in a pitching cycle, he needs to pitch per the recovery calendar, and he needs to pitch again the day that he's recovered. If he's in a cycle that he is off, then he needs to be strength training to the max for a pitcher, because then that is the purpose of that cycle. And then after that, he re-enters with the throwing program, which has to be done systematically with systematic recovery, and has to have the end in mind that he needs to pitch on a certain day, so that you know the kind of length to each cycle of that throwing program you're going to give him. Then once he's pitching, he pitches. He can't be two different people in the same cycle. If you cycle a pitcher's year, or you cycle his career for this year, you are either in a pitching mode, you're in a throwing only mode, or you're in a strength training off season mode. And whatever mode you're in, you have to do it, and do it wisely. You have to go to the exact max that you're going to need to be able to perform in the next cycle. You have to have the recovery per the load that you happen to be utilizing that day. So if a pitcher is working up his pitch count and he's at 79 pitches in a bullpen, getting him ready for his starting season, which is what he needs to be conditioned for in a bullpen, then he has to have 4 days recovery from that. Don't have him pitching in 2 days. Don't say, oh, well, we're not going to let him pitch again for a week. No, he's in a pitching mode. So the day he's recovered, he has 4 days recovery. On that fifth day, he's pitching again. Not the sixth day, not the seventh. If it's a 2-day recovery, on the third day, he's pitching again. Not 1 day, not 4 days. That's how you build them. Same thing with the throwing program, the flat ground. You figure out, is he going to have 1 day off or 2 days off? How many throws is he going to make? 50 or 75? What distance are we taking him at? Then he recovers depending on what happens. So putting him in that phase, but not letting him be in that phase, means that you're mixed up about what he's supposed to be doing, and it never turns out right. You can't accomplish two things. He's either a pitcher that's conditioning and recovering from pitching, or he's in a flat ground throwing where he's not pitching, but he's throwing. That's a whole different story. Or he's in an off season of strength training. Then you transition him correctly. But what happens is, when you're not sure about how to take care of a pitcher, you start to try to do too many things. Let's have him pitch, but let's not have him pitch too much. That's dangerous. If you're worried about how much he's pitching, then there's something else that you're not doing. Now, what is that other thing we could be doing when we're worried about pitchers? Let's eliminate the risk factors. We know that late arms do this. We know that leading with the elbow tears the labrum. I just read a research article the other day. You can't believe the percentage of labrum surgeries in the major leagues. That is from having a leading with the elbow problem. And the supraspinatus injuries. This is from not having the arm in the right position during the motion. I mean, the percentages were so high, it was scary, Joe. If we know we're having all these surgeries, let's look at, is he doing anything that could affect his labrum? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, to your point, Angel, I don't like picking on the Rangers, because there actually are a lot of things, and again, look in the show notes to read the article. There were a lot of things that they were trying to do, and they were on the right track. Like, one of the things that they did, in addition to deloading or stopping them from throwing, was, they said that they wanted to give them an introduction to professional baseball, teach them how to eat properly, teach them how to work out in the weight room properly, specific to pitching. They taught shoulder and elbow strengthening programs, an arm care program. And yet, the one thing that I didn't see in the article about all this teaching was taking a look at their mechanics and teaching them correct mechanics. There could be a point made here that maybe their program could have made a lot of sense, and we might not have even read this article as a failure if maybe those 6 out of 11 pitchers that blew out their elbows, it could just have been that all of those pitchers had a really bad mechanical flaw that was going to.
No, I would say that 100% that is probably what happened. That's why it's don't throw the baby out with the bathwater to the Rangers. Giving a pitcher time off, and I'm talking about you're giving him full time off, is never a bad thing. It's only bad when you don't use the time wisely and you're not having it accompany the other systematic cycles that a pitcher needs to be on. In other words, you don't say to a pitcher, okay, don't pitch for 2 months, and then he goes and sits on the couch. No, there is no off season for a pitcher. He's off season from pitching, and he might be off season from throwing, but he's always doing something. And he's got to be, other than, okay, I need 2 weeks to go on vacation. He's got to be in a strength training cycle. He can't train the same way in the gym as when he's throwing as he does when he's not throwing. So you're absolutely right, Joe. That 6 weeks could have been filled with, let's look at the film from your last high school or college game, and let's start working on the things that we feel you need to understand. And oh boy, we see he's been leading with his elbow all through the season. Okay, strength coach, come here. See this action right here? Okay, his labrum, his shoulder. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to strengthen his shoulder. And I want you to do, make sure that he's strengthened to offset the damage that he could have done by pitching this way. And then you have this place where you start to work with the mechanics. Now, you have to know what you're talking about to be able to do this. So you got to have the right people. But here's the Rangers are not short on hiring people. They're always hiring someone and bringing in all the latest stuff to try to figure out ways to monitor this, do that. So let's start looking at the pitcher and his body to solve the problem. In other words, when you've got something going on, and these pitchers that all had the surgery, they must have been exhibiting some sort of problem up into it. I mean, what happened to Jordan Hicks, that does happen, acute injuries. But how many times have we seen a pitcher, boom, he's good and then he's bad? Not that much. Most of the time it's, well, my forearm's been bothering me. Oh, I was on the IL last month for 30 days. Or, it's always a story. There was no story for Jordan. Mostly there's a story. So all these guys, there was some blind spot that the team had. But to the Texas Rangers, don't stop your idea of what you think. If intuitively you feel these guys are coming out of school and they're kind of a wreck, and I have players that go on to the minor leagues because I've been in business a long time, and I've had coaches call and say to me, do you think he should just start pitching? Does he need time off? What does he tell you? How does he look to you? And I say, let me call you back. And I call the pitcher. I have a complete investigation with him. And then we come up with the answer. And it's never the same for each pitcher. So Texas Rangers, your idea isn't crazy. But I think that there was a blind spot and it wasn't blended in. It's sort of like, you go to the deli and you buy the meat, but you forget to buy the sandwich. And so now you're not enjoying it. You're like, what happened? I thought I was going to love this. Well, you forgot all the accoutrement, so you have to have all the pieces in place. And it's not too late for them to reorder this, but I think this is a take-home message. And I think what we're seeing here is what we were seeing with the St. Louis Cardinals, and I think we're seeing it across the board. The major leagues are trying to do something, but you can't do it when you're dealing with all the external stuff, spin rate, innings, pitch counts. All of those things do not matter in the big picture. The body has to come first. If you have a flat tire, you don't have your car towed in and say, please put it on a computer and tell me if my car's okay. No, you have air put in the tire. Then you see what happens. You have to deal with the physical being, the pitcher himself first. And that means his mechanics, his body, his recovery, etc. Then you start to blend in the other components that fit his model. You just don't overlay a model that isn't personal to him. So I think while I'm feeling like the major leagues are talking out of both sides of their mouth, I'm hoping that this still is in the direction that we want to go. And that with some of these frustrations, like, why didn't this deloading program work? That they're scratching their head saying, okay, it's not wrong, but we may need additional things. And that's what I hope they say. So don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, coaches.
So I feel like the Rangers were so close. They were really on the right track. But I keep seeing the same thing with all these different teams in Major League Baseball. They're all trying to keep pitchers safe. They're trying to prevent the injuries. But it's going back to your example of, getting a flat tire in your car. You get a flat tire and your car stops going. You don't put more gas in the car. And you don't put a turbocharger on the car to make it go faster when you have a flat tire. You assess the situation, you find out why the car is not moving. You see the car is the injury to the car is due to the flat tire, so you put more air in the tire or you change the tire. You don't, again, you don't put more gas in the car. So, I feel like that's kind of what's going on in MLB right now. They just keep looking at the wrong things instead of honing in on what the real issue is, and it's a physical issue. And they just, for whatever reason, it's just a blind spot, as you mentioned. Is there anything more you want to say?
I'll just go back to the whole take-home message. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. When you've got an idea and an intuition that something would work, just package it correctly and make sure that you're starting to pull in all the details. Not seeing the forest for the trees would be another way to describe what I keep seeing happen with teams and some of the methods they're trying to use to improve things. So the good news is most of these things aren't working.
Yeah.
That means that they will keep their mind open.
All right. Well, let's move on to the pearls segment of our podcast. And I can smell it. You just open the box and I feel like you're unwrapping a beautiful pearl. Let's get on with it. Let me know what's going on today.
Yes, everybody needs to have a box of brand new pearls to make their day. I'm not kidding. So, well, this is the time of the year when I get calls from parents and pitchers. And, and I've mentioned this before a few weeks ago. I get the calls of, should my kid shut down? What should we do? When can we come and see you? I want him to come in for a session. He's got a showcase. I hear all these things, and these are all new clients. And when I have a new client call, I'm usually on the phone for quite some time with them doing an interview because I have to pull all the pieces together. I turn away probably 80% of the calls that I get, not because I don't want to work with them. I turn them away and tell them to call me at a different date, which they all end up doing because people they're not cognizant of a lot of factors. So I see a lot of mistakes that go on during this time of the year. And a lot of these are also done in probably the major leagues, Joe. There's probably some of these things that I'm going to mention that are practices that are done that people don't connect the dots on, and they don't connect on how damaging they can be to a pitcher. So I want to talk about a few things that are some of the major mistakes. So coaches, all of you out there, please listen in on this because I believe that when I hear something that's going on, so when I'm questioning a pitcher as to, okay, you're on travel ball, tell me what you do. How many times a week do you play? How many times a week do you pitch? I'm doing an interview and gathering information. It's how I find out that things are happening. And there's things that go on that I shake my head and I go, are you kidding me? So I never believe that a coach wakes up in the morning and says, let's set this up so we can make sure we ruin all our guys. No, I think that there's just a matter of information that people don't know how to connect the dots. So the biggest problem that I have been very concerned about, because it keeps coming up when I get my calls from my high school guys who are in travel ball, and we're trying to figure out when to have an appointment, and they tell me their schedule, that I find out about these things. So coaches, listen to this one thing. Pitchers should not be in the gym in the morning on the day of when they're pitching. I am in shock when I hear the number of pitchers who have got mandatory weight training. It's X number of days a week. They have to be there, and they're lifting weights in the morning and they're pitching in the afternoon or the evening. I'm in shock over this. And I believe that when I have spoken to some of my pitchers in the minor leagues and some pitchers in independent leagues, et cetera, the same things go on sometimes. Pitchers should not be in the gym in the morning of the day they pitch. I don't care what body part, even if you're good enough as a strength coach to say, oh, well, we'll have you do abs or this or that. I know that we're always trying to keep order and organization amongst our groups, but the pitcher has a completely different responsibility than anyone else on that team. He needs to not be in the gym at all doing what the rest of the team is doing. And so training in the morning, and I know that some of you high school coaches, your designated hours for when you're supposed to be in the gym, et cetera. Guys, go to the principal, go to the AD, figure something out. But pitchers can train after they pitch, and that should be specifically to restore the back of their body, the triceps, the back, the rear delt, nothing in the front, no biceps, no chest, no legs, but definitely not on the day when they're pitching. So I understand you have a staff, and if you're in the gym on Tuesday, there's going to be one or two pitchers that will be excused. But guys, you've got to start blending in the real responsibilities of the pitcher and taking that into consideration. Joe, doesn't that sound insane?
Yeah, it does. It sounds really crazy. I mean, I would think that once you finish weightlifting, your body's in recovery mode, and I don't think you want to be recovering when you're pitching.
You're fatigued. You're fatiguing your nervous system big time, and velocity is a product of the nervous system. So, coaches, here's a theme that I constantly try to drill into everyone. And it's kind of the theme I was trying to say in speaking to maybe the major league teams with some of the stuff we talked about today. You have to be cognizant of all the pieces that go on with a pitcher. And if you are trying to have him perform well, you have to be sure you're not doing things that are going to eliminate the potential that he has, or somehow control the potential or diminish the potential he has for his best performance. If you're looking for a kid's arm to throw hard, he can't be training the day that he pitches. He can't train certain body parts the day before he pitches. These are systems that have to be in place. So again, coaches, instead of going out and spending all this money on different gimmicks and different programs and things that you're going to do to try to get your pitchers to throw harder, make sure you're not making this one mistake, because I don't care what program you get. If his muscles are tired from training, he's not going to be able to perform. And this is a given rule, and people who train all the time and lift weights know this. So please blend this into your information. And if you're doing this, and I know it's an innocent mistake, don't be wondering why your pitchers aren't throwing harder, and also know that it is exposing them to a high level of risk of injury. So I know it's something that people don't think about because they think, oh, well, it's in the morning. They get to go home, rest, and eat and everything else. No, it doesn't work that way. So keep the pitchers out of the gym the day that they perform. Second big error. I have parents call me saying, I need my kid to come in to see you. He's had an injury. They want him to start throwing. We want to make sure he's throwing okay. What happened to him? Okay, so I hear he's had a fracture. He had forearm tightness. He had a fracture in his shoulder, his elbow. I hear all kinds of things. Okay, well, so I'm assuming he's off right now and he'll be starting his throwing. Oh, no, he's playing. We're just not letting him pitch. When a pitcher is, and this is especially true in the youth pitching world, because the parents are actually making all the decisions. The kids, of course, are like jello. They don't feel anything. They kind of think, they don't really understand what hurting means or pain means. So the parent is making their decision. And so the parents decide, well, he hurt himself pitching and it doesn't hurt when he plays. So we're putting him in the outfield or on the base and where he's infield, or they'll give me some crazy story. And here's a kid who's healing from a fracture or something serious, and they think that it's okay just because he's not pitching. If you have somebody who is injured, then he needs to be resting completely. The whole system needs to be on board with healing the injury. The muscle itself needs rest just because it's not being taxed in the same way as it is in pitching, which nothing taxes it the same way. It doesn't mean it's not aggravating that muscle and delaying the recovery. Also, could be remodeling the injury in an incorrect way. So, to all the parents out there and the coaches out there who have youth pitchers, when the parent says, oh, he can't pitch, but he's okay to play. If he's on the IL for pitching, you cannot put him in the game in another position without knowing for sure that you're not going to hurt him. So please give that some thought. Can you believe that one, Joe?
Well, not everybody is informed, and that's why we do this podcast. And I think it's important that you let people know, because there's a lot of people that just don't know, and that's why we do this.
Yes. Third thing. So this is a big time for showcases. Now, I did a show a few months ago saying, guys, coaches, parents, you've got to plan out the year. A pitcher, I have my pitchers that I work with, I know what they're doing for the next 8-9 months, when they're going to showcases, when fall ball starts, when they have tryouts, when the first game of spring is, because I have to plan everything so that we're not caught with our pants down. Number one, right now, if you haven't done it, figure out, because travel team is coming to an end right now. So most of the programs are ending the end of July. If you're wondering what your kid's supposed to do, if you have him signed up for a showcase in September, he's not going to be able to shut down completely. You're going to have to carefully look at what he's got to do. If he's got a showcase in November or December, and you're trying to figure out what to do between now and then, and how much time he should be off, or should he be throwing, or whatever. You have to make those decisions based on what's happened and what he has to be ready for. So do not make decisions in an isolated world where you're just looking at this week or this month. You have to make decisions based on what he needs to be ready for. And the biggest error that I see right now is I have tons of parents calling me that they're coming into California for showcases. Stanford has a showcase this weekend. I've had about 4 or 5 calls from people traveling from out of state that because they were coming to California in the Bay Area, they wanted to see me. And when I said, well, what are you here for? And then they would tell me their schedule. And they wanted me to do instruction, possibly before a showcase. And then when I say, I don't think it's a good idea, they go, oh, you're right. So you have to plan out. If you have a son that you feel it needs some work, the time to get the work is not before a showcase. It's also not when he's really in season. If he's in pain, yes, he needs to be looked at immediately to see what's he doing, so that you get some sense of the scope of why he's in pain. But if this is a performance thing and he needs help with location, just to be better, velocity, whatever, you cannot have a pitcher in instruction, especially new instruction. Sometimes tune-ups are very important, especially if you already have a relationship with the coach, like myself, and then we know, okay, we're working on one thing, like, he can't locate his changeup, so we're looking at the very specific thing. Oh, look what you're doing. We fix it. That's different. But when you're talking about new instruction to really have things analyzed, you don't do this prior to a showcase. And because we're going into showcase season now, I want everyone to think carefully. So I'm recommending that everyone get calendars out for their pitchers and figure out, what do the next 6 months look like, and what do they need, and when can you get them what they need without interfering with their actual performance. You don't want to be inside someone's head before they're going to take the hill. And that's just the rule. So those are some of the biggest mistakes that I see happening. And this is the time of the year when mistakes are blossoming. So I thought I would nip some of this in the bud and hopefully save some arms and help people get organized.
Well, all right. Those are great pearls of wisdom there, Angel. And I think that we all appreciate you sharing those with us. So that is all we have for this episode. If you enjoyed what you heard and you're still listening, then you must think this is somewhat valuable. I urge you to please tell a friend, tell another coach, tell a parent, tell a pitcher about this show, and encourage them to subscribe, because we would just like to help all of the arms that we can help. Again, that's all we have for this week. We'll be back again in about 2 weeks. In the meantime, happy 4th of July, and we wish you safe and effective performance on the pitching mound.
Yes, and thank you for listening.